Good afternoon. It is June 7th, 2021. Today would be the 2 month anniversary after the third of what was posted as proclamations concerning very important matters. My understanding is somebody is trying to revisit a scheme that I never consented to and would not consent to unless the other people involved had explicitly provided their consent in advance and had agreed to terms regarding accountability as well as any sort of situation which could be engaged in order to disengage or de escalate the matters at hand. And I understand that now what has happened is there has been this engagement of this resequencing. And in the course of that resequencing, the other people involved with claiming the other options of concern defaulted. And so as a result, now we are where we are. I had posted on April 1st, 2021, a notice regarding DOJ Internal Affairs Manual Community Oriented Policing Strategies. This was one of three proclamations that I posted, the other one having to do with the military pension system, and the third one having to do with matters related to the Supreme Court of the United States, but also the judicial branch overall. The one related to the judicial branch, specifically regarding the Supreme Court of the United States in consideration of a case, Argus Media versus Food Marketing Institute, is actually 2 months today since it was first published. But because of this resequencing, that what is actually coming up today for reference is the one that was posted on April 1st, which is the one concerning the DOJ Internal Affairs Manual regarding community-oriented policing strategies. I anticipate this is probably attempting to reference Los Angeles, and by virtue of referencing Los Angeles, what it really wants to do is kick back to San Francisco with a acknowledgement of San Diego, hoping that they will be able to get some sort of credit for something a little further north. But we're going to address all three at the same time. Because what this brings up is a very important matter related to deficiencies. And I use this word deficiency in a multiple context concerning the basis upon which those proclamations could move forward and what is really going on now. That is a very important matter at stake, including the fact that, unbeknownst to me at the time that I posted the publication of the notice regarding the Supreme Court of the United States, the Federal Housing Administration was in the course of releasing information connected to information that it was providing to people concerning the fact that it had identified what it called previously non-performing loans and had at some point made a determination that these loans previously identified as non-performing had started reperforming, and that they were going to make them available for auction during the month of May. Now, elsewhere, I'm on the record for saying that those terms of auction were completely illegal and illegitimate, if for no other reason than the original characterization not only of them as loans, but also in terms of considerations of performance, were intentionally fraudulently characterized at the onset with a willful intent to deceive at the onset, and hence have influenced whatever would be considered performance since. I also believe that they've been misabused and misrepresentation of what would be acceptable as any sort of derivative application concerning the original intent to engage in agreement from the onset. And so we have a very compounded situation that is at work right now. I also understand that we're in a context where there are multiple entities and areas of concern that are involved concurrently. And so what happens in one location can have a profound impact on other locations. Today is a day that's very important in terms of being a 3-year anniversary for reports that were filed in the state of Texas, but that were connected to matters that had already predated the filing of those reports. Seeing as how today is the 3rd anniversary, the refusal of anybody to respond appropriately until this time has a very significant consequence. It specifically and directly, demonstrably has a consequence on the matters at hand associated with housing safety, and also the safety of people in their own homes, insofar as they have them. I'm not going to relent on this as a primary basis. This has been something that has been ongoing for a considerable amount of time. It has global implications. At some point in time during the 2018 election cycle, or actually 2019, after the 2018 election, prior to the swearing in of new Congress people and others in the Senate that were elected in 2018. And during what had been announced as the onset of the 2020 presidential season, there was a public notice that I provided in another forum, which was discussing the nascent development of what I had hoped to be a strategy for reconsidering the Department of Defense and appropriations for the Department of Defense. Specifically, Department of Defense appropriations connected to contracting with third-party providers of services and goods, and the specific manner in which the contracting cycle of the Department of Defense also factored into other areas of the federal appropriations process, and how that factorization also impacted assessments connected to the real estate market, specifically the residential real estate market, and how there was a possibility for a reconfiguration and a recapitulation of these policies in order to not only minimize the quantity of expenditures associated with the Department of Defense, but to recapitulate them in a manner that would provide better quality and it would allow for resources to be opened that would have an appropriate kind of security and stability for non-military use, as opposed to having so much pegged to the military. See, when you allow for malfeasance and misappropriation connected to the Department of Defense or military assets, this has an impact on every part of our economy. This is not just the domestic economy, but this is also in connection with our relationships with our international partners and those that we might need to assume a more stern posture in regards to. And this is for this reason, it is very important that we do not overlook the relationship between an effort to refuse to apply appropriate standards, including high standards, separate and apart from what would be acceptable in a civilian context in the military. But we also do not unduly burden the military by allowing for it to be made available for speculation or hedging in connection with civilian sectors that are necessarily going to have different standards. I contend that this goes all the way back to things that were going on during the time of the buildup of the first Gulf War. Since that time and onward, not just in relationship to our policy internationally, in terms of how we engage in foreign theaters, but also in terms of what was going on domestically. For those that were in the military or around people that were active duty military during that time frame, then you already know that there had been a policy that had been implemented at the level of the president and that had been applied throughout the United States to recapitulate the arrangement of the lifestyle and the situation associated with people in active duty military, specifically regarding military base installations and the kinds of services and the kinds of community assets that were provided to not only members of the military, but their family. And the decommissioning of American military installations was a very comprehensive process that had been discussed, at least within the military, for a very, very considerable amount of time for the potential implications of the long-term implications it would have not only in the United States, but also internationally. I contend that we are in a process where we are going to have to significantly reassess the lack of foresight that was demonstrated in the implementation of policy regarding the decommissioning of the American military base installations, specifically when it came to the military family, the military dependent situation, and provision of services for members of the military. This specific kind of social recapitulation within the United States was correlated with and in connection with abuses of public office that were not prosecuted and to this day have not been addressed appropriately. I believe that the two of them went hand in hand in a manner that has had very deleterious consequences for us and also internationally. The way that other countries respond is one thing, especially other countries that were unduly subjected to a refusal within the United States to hold people in abuse of their office, including people that had a role, a command position in regards to the military, both in terms of the lifestyle and the capacity for the military to take care of itself domestically, as well as what we did abroad. But when we have had so much of a time frame that has been able to transpire, and there has been such a significant social recapitulation without attending to the matters at hand as they needed to be attended to, then inevitably those consequences are going to compound, and they're going to be ones we're going to have to address one way or another. In some way, shape, or form, they are being addressed right now. but they're being addressed in a way that does not allow for a basis upon which to recalibrate in the necessary manner for the other sectors that are involved and the other sectors that are implemented. So, as a result of what ended up happening then, we're dealing with the consequences now. And I believe that this has a very significant impact on relationships that we could otherwise have been able to build internationally, that were not able to prosper. And unfortunately, the consequences have aided and abetted actions in other countries that are unsustainable for those countries as well as ours. Had the United States taken the initiative and provided appropriate leadership when it came to cracking down on organized crime, including organized crime that had infiltrated the government, and we would have been in a much better position to support our partners abroad that had to deal with the same things. When there was so much of a transition that was happening, including in the Middle East, including in parts of Asia, in the former Soviet Union, including right here in our own hemisphere, and we refused to deliver on what was absolutely necessary in order to address the profundity of the long-term implications of refusing to crack down on organized crime, inevitably we were going to get to where we are today. And it is a disservice for us to pretend otherwise. We have the capacity, we have the fortitude, and I do believe, despite her very, very significant misrepresentation in the media, we have the people to actually address this forthrightly. But it is going to mean that we're going to have to take some stern steps. Now, I understand that part of the community-oriented policing strategies was a counter-movement that had also developed in urban areas throughout this country. One of the understandings was that there is a difference between retributive justice and restorative justice. This is something that I know personally goes back for a couple of decades, ever since I started becoming politically active and politically literate. One of the big problems that was happening during the mid to late 90s had to do with the understanding that the increased rates of incarcerations for people within our country were based upon a particular paradigm that had a very institutionalized understanding of how to deal with crime, as opposed to understanding that crime was not just about specific individuals involved, but was about harm to a community. I've said this elsewhere, and I maintain, and when we talk about restoration, when we talk about reparations, when we talk about restitution, and what is really important is for us to identify what our communities were actually deprived of in the course of that crime. This goes to speaking to what we understand to be leadership, but also followership. It's something to be in a position of knowing that you have the capacity to provide a leadership role and being denied. But it's also something to be in a capacity to know that you really have a sincere desire to serve, and that you actually derive pleasure or joy out of serving and seeing people succeed, including in a context that you may not personally be best suited to, or a context that is best suited by you being in another position and not being able to do that. This is also part of what crime deprives us of. The difference between service and subjection. The difference between leadership and guidance. These nuances are actually very, very rich parts not only of our vocabularies, but also our cultural context and our legacies. And so when we do not apply an appropriate conceptualization and articulation of what we've actually been deprived of in the course of not actually addressing crime as crime, and this compounds over time. And I'm concerned that this has also become a very significant burden that communities disproportionately impacted by certain kinds of crime are bearing. This is another reason why I, again, promote and support efforts to identify crime in areas where crime is most pervasive and thus far least prosecuted. One of the things that has happened throughout the last several years that I personally have been witness to and have had to address is in connection with relationships with other countries, specifically when it comes to the narcotics trafficking situations that are addressing cartel activity involving drug cartels or human smuggling cartels, or other things that might be identifiable as narco terrorism. One of the major things that is pointed out by international allies, as I've said before and has been told to me before, is that the focus on the model of targeting something under the auspices or the rubric of a kingpin organization has significant shortcomings. Now, I am on the record and am still pursuing a process of attempting to have prosecuted a criminal conspiracy with an understanding of it specifically identifiable as a kingpin operation because it is specifically connected to abuse of public office. As a form of public corruption, it is important to identify it as a kingpin operation in order to identify the nexus of control associated with abuse, not only of public office, but also command authority. And because of that reason, this is a specific reason I have pursued and continue to pursue it from a standpoint of understanding it in a kingpin organizational structure. However, in the course of so doing, it is also exposing other nexes of conspiratorial activity, including ones that attempt to extort people at their most vulnerable and or preclude any sort of social mobility or circulation of necessary investment, including intellectual capital investment, based upon a demonstration of fealty that is most often accomplished by a willingness to participate in crime as a demonstration of commitment. Now, there are other places where I've discussed this and other people have discussed as well, how that is actually a form of gang recruitment. And the distinction between organizing and recruiting people into an alternative social or other sort of organizational effort, and then putting something within a structure of criminal gang or organized crime operation are nuances communities have been discussing for a very long time. But we are also at a point where it is important for us to claim our power and to wield it effectively. Using clandestine organization efforts that are intentionally attempting to change the legislation to normalize and legitimize previously illegal activity, as opposed to actually creating structures that demonstrate an alternative to using vice and crime for political leverage. Well, what have we got that represents us politically? What is supposed to moonlight or masquerade as if it is the Republican representation of the people this year, 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 8 years ago? It's compounded. And it is for that reason that it is important to maintain this understanding. I contend that at this point in time, we need to seriously address matters related to the fraud that went on in connection with the recent Federal Housing Authority reports. Now, the concern I had is that among the many things it did is not only did it misrepresent that there were loans associated with the real estate market that were allowed to be auctioned off, but that it was accompanied by a form of indexing that itself did not accurately reflect the realities of the situation regarding residential and other kinds of property within the United States at this time. I have already recounted and I have already provided information about how there was manipulation of public information, including information through government agencies, over the course of the last year. While different local administrations, as well as different federal agencies, intentionally engaged in misrepresentation in their formal, official electronic media, which, under the law now concerning the digital records laws in the United States, is the official public record. When government agencies allow for the official public electronic record to be mischaracterized, even for a short period of time, this is a tampering with government records. And because of the kinds of concurrent processes and or simultaneous processes, including very large scale, potentially transactional processes that can involve multiple other processes that are running concurrently, willfully misrepresenting the public record associated with a federal agency at the time that a transaction is taking effect or is ongoing is a serious and egregious crime. It has very, very significant implications. And that is why when we talk about dealing with organized crime in this country, one of the major things we're going to have to deal with is accountability for public records. We are not in a stage where it is justifiable to try to confidentialize or make a gross misrepresentation of a justification for non-disclose, especially when it comes to the volume and the quantity of information that is attempting to transact simultaneously. This is a very important matter, and so moving forward is going to be very important to identify who within what agency allowed for a tampering of official government documents at a time frame or in time frames and during time frames when very important legislative and executive actions were taking place. This is what I understand and I believe is needed in terms of accurately identifying the structural means by which this is being accomplished, but also going toward establishing and maintaining accountability. While this is things that focus on a federal level and an understanding that the grotesqueness of this conspiracy is that comprehensive, it's also something that on a local level, including a state level, or an even more immediate civil administration level, needs to be addressed as well. I've seen for very significant amount of time that a policy was implemented during the Obama administration that allowed for a kind of comprehensive transactional process to occur over the weekend that ends up manifesting in the local administrative political activity of various municipalities around the country. I've been watching this trend for over 3 years, even prior to COVID-19. One of the things that is very evident is that it has a very specific matrix of connectivity through the local public pension schemes. Certain municipalities are more intensely implicated than others. Nonetheless, the specific matrixing and the specific precision through which it has been accomplished is not something that can be done in isolation, and it's not something that can be done merely under the concerted operationalization of a small group of people pulling some levers somewhere remotely. While there is definitely a very significant matter that has to be attended to regarding the relationship with the financial services and banking sector, as well as the insurance sector, and the operationalization of these matters, it is also high time and very important time frame right now where people who allege that they're qualified to represent the people in political office show the kind of competence in their position that acknowledges what it means to be trying to do the business of that particular municipality or that particular entity, while also understanding that there are concurrent processes going on. There's no reason why everything in this country right now connected to, for instance, cybernetics and the relationship of biophysiological programming or bioengineering should be divorced from any discussion of the digital economy and or should be collapsed merely into a matter of derivatives via the healthcare sector. At some point, we're going to have to move forward on discussing very comprehensively how healthcare is a derivative, how healthcare and how the medical industrial complex is a massive, massive derivative economy in and of itself. And once we start doing that, when we start being authentic with what is actually causing the physical causes of our pain, then, and only then, are we going to be in a position to actually talk honestly about healthcare, including healthcare cost. In the meantime, I'm really hoping to move forward on addressing these matters, and in the course of so doing, I will, again, let you know I do not approve of this resequencing. Let me just repeat, I do not approve of this resequencing. I also do not approve of the illegal coinage that was attempted through the Congress in the last 3 years. Any of it. And it's very important that that is acknowledged on the level it's at, COP. Have a good day.